Hey everyone, this is Mike Dunn, and you are listening to Rethinking EDU. I am, as usual, super excited to be hanging out with our guests remotely, of course. We are here hanging out this evening remotely, of course, with our friends Eva Mejia from Big Picture Learning and Zelia Gonzales, who is a recent graduate of the Met in Sacramento and is currently a student at Cornell University. Before we get into talking with them, though, let's check in with the co-hosts. Matt, how are you feeling tonight?
Doing well. Spent the day sort of floating down a river on a tube with my family, so that was fun, and I'm happy to be excited to be talking with you guys tonight.
Awesome.
Nice.
What about you, Janine?
Well, there was a little drama right before we got ready to get started here. My father had purchased one of those big blow-up bouncy pool sort of things for my kids. But it was used.
Okay.
I bought it used, and it's been awesome. We've been using it for the past couple of weeks or whatever. But my youngest son went down the slide and somehow punctured it with his foot. So there was like a disaster like 5 minutes before we got started here. So I don't know. I'm going to have to look for a patch kit or something. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight, and especially to share a student perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds, potentially terrible there at the Janine household, but whatever.
Some sad children, yeah.
And let's check in with Zelia. So Zelia, where are you located right now, and how are you feeling tonight?
Oh, thank you. I am located back in my parents' house in Sacramento, California, and I am feeling good. I found time to clean my space, so my house smells like a home goods store, and I'm very happy.
I am very jealous. That's awesome. I need to pick up some of those cleaning habits. We are getting ready to move over here, and so I am trying to piece all my stuff together, and it's always a good time. But yeah, cool. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. And Eva, where are you calling in from, and how are you feeling this evening?
I'm feeling great. I'm calling in from San Diego. I grew up in San Diego and Tijuana on both sides of the border, but I don't live here anymore. I usually live in Northern California, and only when you're from Southern California is Northern California does that feel like bad weather to you or cold. So I've been spending most of the time when I'm in San Diego, I try to have my office outside. So if you hear a little wind or some birds, and today it's because I literally put out a table on my parents' terrace, and that's where I work from, and try to be outside as much as possible.
That sounds amazing. And I said this earlier that I think we could really use some maybe birds chirping in the background of our episode just to make things a little nicer for everybody. So I appreciate that. So we're here talking with you both. Thank you so much again for joining us. And we're going to talk about big picture learning. So big picture learning, for everybody out there who is listening and you never heard of big picture learning, they've been around since the mid-90s, founded in Providence, Rhode Island by Dennis Lickey and Elliot Washer. There's an amazing sort of creation story that goes along with big picture. There's a couple really great books. Check them out. And Eva works for Big Picture as their chief strategy and program officer. Sorry, I meant to say chief program and strategy officer. And Eva, can you kind of give us the broad spectrum overview of what a big picture school is? What are some of the central tenets of a big picture school?
Absolutely. And if it's okay, I think I might actually switch it around and have Zelia tell you about her experience first. And then I can come in and tell you sort of like what was behind the design there a little bit, but it might be just more fun to have her tell you her story.
Yeah, so I was lucky to go to a theme-based and project-based elementary school, and then I went to a very big traditional middle school, which funneled me into a very big traditional high school in Sacramento. And I just was not very happy there my first semester. It kind of felt like I wasn't really learning anything. But I was busy all the time, kind of traditional education stuff. And so I went to look for a different type of school, and really the only school in my district that was going to be different, not just like on the outside, but like on the values, was the Met. And so I went on a shadow day there. And I joined that next semester, and I had been there the whole time since till I graduated. And I guess I'll explain like a little bit about what my freshman year was like versus my senior year a little bit. We do internships Tuesdays and Thursdays. So when I first got to the school, I didn't have an internship. So Tuesday and Thursdays, I was in our big multi-purpose room, updating my resume and my cover letter, sending that out to workplaces that I thought would be interesting. Eventually, I found an internship on our on-campus bicycle repair shop, and so I worked there the rest of my freshman year. And yeah, I went to classes. I took a class at Sac City for the first time that year as well, and then that kind of just ramped up from there. Every year, I kind of found an internship that was more meaningful to me, kind of honing in on what I like to do. I had ended up at a elementary school next, where I figured out I did not want to be a teacher. Love all the teachers out there, and I have so much respect for you all. I realized that I could not do it. And then I went to a cultural arts nonprofit, which was a wonderful experience. And I learned a lot about art and hosting events and community liaisoning. And then I ended up working at the city of Sacramento for my last 2 years, where I really focused on public service, and I ended up working a lot in minimum wage reform and then cannabis policy reform there. And yeah, senior year, I had done so many college classes that I didn't really have much to do. So I ended up working at my internship my senior year, all 4 days. And then Fridays, I went to my school to take my mandatory English class and to be with my advisory and do Kick Me Out, which is something that we do at the end of days, Friday, the last 30 minutes with my whole school. We all just hang out together and do like an event, or sometimes the science class would do like an experiment for all of us. And at the beginning of the school week, we did that too. That's called Pick Me Up, the first 30 minutes of school at the beginning of the week. Yeah, I think I'll pause there so that Eva can jump in. And then you can ask me any other the details I missed.
I just want to point out though that like your gateway into your big picture school was your internship at a bicycle repair shop. That's so cool. Just for the record, that is super, super cool. But Eva, what do you want to add into that or illuminate a little bit more for us?
First, you'll see why I didn't want to go first, because there's nothing I could tell
Absolutely.
you that would, it pales in comparison to tell it the color that Zelia and any of our students can bring to telling the story of our schools is much richer than what I can share. But really, what I want to highlight in her story is that one of the things that you heard is that she drove the learning. So it wasn't like, here's welcome to high school, the way that I got my little paper that had like, these are my classes, these are my required and X number of years of English and X number of years of math and all these things. It really was Zelia's interest that drove the learning, not just the normal subjects. And part of that, which is evident actually in the bicycle shop, is that when we're saying that she's driving the learning, it's not just about head-centered work that revolves around reading, writing, or math, or some of the ways that we think about academics and learning, which is actually just a small piece of what can be learned in the world. So we know that there are talents in the trades, in the arts, in real world problem solving. And so rather than recreate them all inside the classroom by having a lot of workshops and art spaces and things in the school, which we do have some of that, we really try to make use of the whole community. And so the community, the real world, is the school. There are these permeable boundaries between the school. So it's getting the school out to the community and the community into the school. And so you heard her talk about her internships, and in those internships, and I'm sure she'll share more, she had adult mentors who really could guide her. So rather than have us tell her what the standards for doing excellent work at any of the places where she worked. It was the mentors telling her what excellent work was and pushing her in her doing real world projects. So real things that were going to make the life and the work at each of those places better. And then another thing that's a big part of our work, and of course none of the things that I've said really um, hold if we don't know our students. And so there's a big component of having each student be well known by their advisor, by the teachers, everybody in the community, so that we know, who is Zelia, who matters to her, matters to her family, where does she want to go in life, what's important to her in her identity, and how is she developing. And so the advisories are the place where that happens, and being connected to a small group of students are connected to their advisor. For the most part, it's for their whole high school experience, although sometimes there are some shifts in that. So those are some of the key components. And I should say, though, there's some variety among our schools, and that's intentional and good. When we work with folks, it really is working with them to see what about our model makes sense for them in their context and what needs to be innovated and adapted on. So some schools have, for example, the West in Oakland has a strong social justice focus because that's what's important to that community and that's what they want to do. Other schools have a bit of a STEM theme, and that's what's important to their communities. So some of our schools vary along with what matters to that community.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned right away, which I really want to maybe hear a little bit more from Zelia about, is that students at Big Picture schools are well-known students. And that is a super big problem. And I'm sure Zelia can talk about that as she transitioned from her large comprehensive public high school to her Big Picture school. Zelia, do you want to kind of talk about that shift from being just maybe another student to being like, part of the fabric of the school?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, going from my big public high school to this school, I was shocked at how I ever went to a school where I could go to 6 different classes and they knew nothing about me. Like, after having been in a class where someone could know me, like, it just shocked me that that was how I was expected to be for the last 4 years. And then, going from the Met, where I had really strong relationships with different teachers, not even just my advisor, like with other teachers that got to know me and got to speak on me in our gateways and our panels, our exhibitions at the end of every quarter, that got to speak to my credit in their own classrooms and what they see about me in my hallway, and my relationships even with the principal that I never would have had at the big high school that I had gone before. I actually got to accomplish projects with my principal's help at the Met. And the principals at the school I went to before were strictly disciplinarians. So that relationship would have never existed before. Yeah, that was such an interesting transition also into college, where I once again kind of became another student in a cog, if you would say. But I was lucky because the Met, teaches us, well, I don't even want to say teaches, because I don't know that I was directly taught, like, this is how you have relationships, but it allows us the opportunity to foster and learn and, like, for ourselves and grow through relationships with adults, that I knew that, oh, I need adult relationships in college and I need to go those for myself, but I know how to make friendships with adults and to have great relationships with professors and find a mentor for myself on campus, because I know that that's what I need. So it was interesting being in all 3 environments, but in the end, knowing, what to do in that situation, where I saw a lot of my peers in college struggle with that afterwards.
She's talking about, I think, speaks to the underlying pedagogy in Big Picture schools, and Elliot and Dennis coined the terms relationships, relevance, and rigor years ago. And so that being known, so having that relationship, that's how you know what is relevant to young people. And then you can really turn up the rigor, because now when she's hooked and she has an issue that she's working on, and that you heard her talk about advocating for policy change in Sacramento, she is going to up her own rigor, or we can very easily up her own rigor around the learning that she needs to do for those projects. So that's kind of the order of how it goes. And it was lovely to hear how you took that, and then you made your Cornell experience be that. So that always makes us proud. And one of the other things that I think is important to mention is that the issue of being known is really coming to the forefront in education now, because as folks are trying to connect with young people over Zoom or over distance learning, when you don't know your students, trying to establish and keep any kind of connection is nearly impossible. Whereas if you've got a relationship that you're building on, then you know what their situation is like, what things are like at home, and so it's a lot easier to build on that and stay. It's more about staying connected as opposed to trying to build that connection during these times.
Zelia, it's pretty clear that you had some really amazing experiences at the Met. And I'm wondering, now that you're at Cornell, how some of those experiences have translated into your college experience.
Yeah, I'm actually going to hand this off to Eva to maybe tell the story about how I approached you, because I feel like that illustrates it better.
Well, we could always do you tell the story, then I tell the story, and see if they match at this point.
Okay.
But
All right.
yeah, well, and you're welcome to tell them about what you did in the first years at Cornell as well. But yeah, how we met was I think it's a very big picture, and it's a very COVID story. So Zelia, thousands, or I don't know how many college students were experienced in March. She was sent home to school closing and things turning around really fast. And I don't know how many days you were home, Zelia, before you started emailing out to how many days were you home?
I wasn't home yet. I had actually approached Andrew before that. I wanted an internship over the summer, and then I just was like, okay, now when we were getting home.
Exactly. Yeah. So she didn't even arrive in California before she was turning her request for a summer internship into a now internship. And so she met with a bunch of us at Big Picture and said, this is my trajectory. This is what I've been up to. These are my internships. And she could weave together the story that made her sound like she was a mid-career professional, because she was telling me that she was interested in issues of social justice, and she had thought about education, but she knew teaching wasn't her role, because she had spent some time in the classroom, and so she was looking for a different role. And she had these questions around how an organization manages their strategy and manages through change and builds capacity in these things. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I must have the video wrong. Like, you clearly sound like you're much older. And she did sound like a mid-career professional, because in some ways she has been having a career for a long time. So she turned that being home into a big picture experience, where she said all these things, and of course, in true big picture fashion, I gave her a bunch of assignments. I said, oh yeah, you're interested in this, read this, do that, and let's talk again next week. And she had all these thoughts, and we invited her to some of the professional development communities of practice that we were doing that week with some of our leaders in our schools, and she was in there with them, talking to them about her experience and brainstorming how to transition into online learning and being a thought partner. And so she kind of started her internship before being my official intern. And a week after when we met, I was like, yeah, so we're doing this thing. So she's been my intern, quote unquote, for now a couple of months. And as she's making the best out of her experience.
So now I'll expand on that. And I'll say that in college, like, the difference between myself and my peers, and what I think helped me a lot from Big Picture, was that I already had a network. I knew who to reach out to. I also had, like I had said, I knew how to build new relationships with people. So when there was like networking opportunities or I met new people on my campus, I knew how to create relationships and sustain them. And then exactly what I think Eva had heard from me too is that like I knew how to story tell about myself because I had practiced it every single quarter at the Met. That was what exhibitions were, was telling the story of yourself and how you've grown in your personal development and what you're looking forward to next. And so I had been practicing that for the last 3.5 years, and into college I knew what to say because I knew I had reflected on myself and what I wanted to do next. And I think something that gets lost, and while I'm so grateful for all the praise and it's very sweet, I think that it gets lost that this is not just the pedestal students who are like this. Every single person I graduated with could be speaking to you right now in this exact same way. And everyone has had similar, experiences at the Met that have put them in a position where they are more comfortable in uncertainty because they, have their networks, they know how to storytell, they know what they're interested in and what they're doing next. Like I have a friend, Morrissey, who started working at a VW auto shop down the street, and he is totally skilled at Volkswagen automotives, and that's he has his job during quarantine right now. I have another friend who worked as a graphic he's a photographer for a huge graphic studio downtown, and he's one of their like more experienced and senior photographers now, where his job is more safe than others. Like there is a lot of experience that we get, that puts us in a different position than others. Yeah, just like Eva has said before, I like to think that I'm special, but I'm not exceptional, and all of my peers could be talking exactly like I am, and you should reach out to them because they have great stories to tell as well.
I wanted to get some insight from you both. You've mentioned a bit that the teachers are advisors, and Zelia, I wanted to get your insight first. So teachers at Big Picture Learning at the Met that you went to, they're called advisors. How did you experience them different than teachers you had in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so every teacher at the Met, or for the most part, every teacher also has their own advisory, which they've had since their students were in ninth grade up until they graduate that class, in the next 4 years. There are some exceptions, but and so I think the main difference between when I went to a larger high school and when I went to the Met was that every single one took the time to understand where I was coming from. And I think a story that maybe illustrates that best is that I was once kicked out of my math class. And I think that, like, at a traditional high school, this would have ended in much more of like a detention in a punitive way. But I was messing around in like an algebra 2 class, and I was goofing off and I was distracting other folks because I had gotten my work done before and I was just kind of bored, I guess, just kind of being a troublemaker. And my teacher, instead of, sending me outside to sit on the ground or get me in trouble, give me detention, which I'm not even sure if that entirely exists at the Met, not that I experienced, he kicked me out of class, but he redirected me towards his college class and said, you're distracting folks, you need a different challenge. And I think that that illustrates the kind of relationships, the one student at a time, that the Met is all about. If he didn't know me and hadn't been paying attention to my work, if the class sizes weren't small, if he didn't have a relationship where he could kick me out and I didn't think that it was him being mean to me, that situation could have gone completely different. And I could completely imagine, and I have peers in the bigger high school and my friends who have experienced this, where they've been kicked out for no reason from classes, where they easily just needed someone to talk to them, and find a better place for them. So I don't know if Eva, you want to jump in.
Well, let me just ask a quick follow-up to you. So that conversation that you had that was really influential, what was the context of that? How did that take place? Where did that take place? When did that take place? Oftentimes in schools, there's no time for those sorts of deep, meaningful conversations.
Yeah. Well, it's not that it's one deep, meaningful conversation. It's that
Mm,
he knew me from a whole year and had,
right.
gotten to know me and talked with me in little spurts. But, I also got to know him. It was a two-sided relationship where I
Yeah.
understood that he could be vulnerable with me and I could be vulnerable with him. So it created a relationship, not just one meaningful conversation. And I think if I remember, I can't remember the entire situation, but I think that day he just asked me to go and do something so that I would get out of the classroom. And then I think he talked to me
Yeah.
after school when I was walking down the hallway, and he was like, "Yeah, you're not going to be in that class anymore. You're going to go to Sac City with me after school." And so, and I, was just, I completely understood. He was like, "You're messing around and distracting other students." And he just asked me to do something, to help him in the class, and I did it. And I think that the relationship that we had built over a longer period of time made that so that wasn't like an
Mm-hmm.
elaborate, dramatic
Yeah,
situation.
that's really cool. Ev, I wanted to get your input from the other side, from the the admin side, the running the organization. So advisory, we've talked about this a bit throughout, and I appreciate Zelia's story. Like those stories are so helpful to hear. And it's obvious that it's important. How have you at Big Picture Learning gone about to structure things to make advisory an important element of the learning process?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail in the head by asking about time, because sometimes the structures and literally the time doesn't allow for the relationships and the richness that we're talking about. So the to the extent possible, having um, the learning be done around advisory, and having advisory serve as large blocks of time where um, that is the core of somebody's learning experience. And now I mentioned schools that do it a little bit different, and there's some hybrids. So at Zelia's school, they have some classes. You heard her talk about math class, so they do have some classes, but advisory is a big chunk of it. And in advisory, you do these independent learning plans. You write out your own goals, your own um, development goals in different areas, and that's where the internship at the bicycle shop makes sense. It's based on that independent learning plan that you work with an advisor on. So all those structures, the plan, the time to work with folks. Another thing that sometimes surprises people that is important to note, because I think it's a really important part of the design of the internships, is that the students get their own internships. You heard it quickly in Zelia's story where she said that she was practicing um, cold calls. Like, you have young people making cold calls during school, and they're frankly so cute. When you've got ninth graders on their cell phone calling somebody, and you've got like other of their peers kind of cheering them on and like getting them excited because they are calling that bicycle shop, or they are calling that that office, or that workshop, or wherever it is that they're interested in, and they're saying, hey, I'm a student at the school and I am interested in X, and that storytelling that the Zelia is talking about. So they learn how to do that, and they get their own internships, and they fail too. They get hung up on cold calls like we do as adults, but they learn how to do that and how to tell their own story. So that's part of the curriculum of that advisory, so that they can do that. So those, I appreciate the question about the structures, because you definitely need those structures to get those wins, and it's not something that can happen with what was called advisory when I went to school was 15 minutes of announcements essentially, and it was a yeah,
It's
exactly.
different
So
than
it's
that.
it's we're
Yeah.
talking about the center of your learning, not the announcements and the
Mm,
place where you, or the homeroom kind of approach.
If you'll allow me to add to that, just real quick about the relationships in advisory. Advisors are also supposed to be your advocate. So the relationship you have with your advisor, that's someone that also is like your first go-to if something's going wrong. Well, you advocate for yourself first, and then you bring in your advisor to back you up because they know about your home life, they know about your family, they've been tracking your progress for the last however many years they were in class, they've been in every one of your exhibitions. And so those have someone in your court. I remember advocating for myself in a classroom in a traditional school, and no one is there to back you up. No one knows you well enough to say, "Oh yeah, what she's saying is true." Like this, we're going to create an independent learning plan for her around this and those things. And I'll also add what you said, Eva, about friends, like other students, like hyping each other up while they're calling. That is so true. And the people in your advisory, like those become your best friends in your family. And I remember, us all helping each other with what we didn't know, and helping edit each other's cover letters and say, hey, could you just sit with me in the room while I make this call in case I'm struggling? Like that was the sort of relationship we had with each other that maybe, we didn't know and couldn't, you know, identify with each other in, surface level ways, but we grew together over 4 years and we all watched each other progress. And so those relationships were very meaningful for sure.
I just want to share two follow-up things. One funny, one not so funny. I don't know about you all, but when I had advisory when I was in high school, all we did was watch Channel One News with Anderson Cooper. Anybody with me? Y'all watch that? Huh? No.
Apparently, I'm older because we had announcements read to us.
We had them on like a television in the room.
Promise you, I didn't go to school before television, though.
Okay, fair enough. The other funny, not so funny thing is that when I was a big picture advisor, and really my first teaching job was in Detroit, and I still text back and forth with some of those students, and that was like 2007 or something like that. So a really long time ago. And I don't even keep in that close of contact with some of the students that have graduated from my school right now in the last couple years. And so those relationships that you're pointing out, Zelia and Eva, are as critical to the big picture model is no joke. It is really the heart and the soul of what make big picture schools really great. Go ahead, Janine.
Well, I really do love that you were referring to your advisor as an advocate. That that you painted a perfect picture of telling that story of being in the traditional public school, and you have a teacher, but who's got your back. So I appreciated hearing that. But I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about like the day-to-day, like what does it look like for a typical for student at Big Picture? What's their day look like? Are there traditional classes, or is this really like all project work, hands-on, the internships, or what else is there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Eva had talked about how all schools are kind of different, and the motto is one student at a time. So I don't know that I could paint you like a traditional day for any student, because like my day and my projects that I work on and what I was doing was so different. And like I had said, like my senior year looked totally different than other people's senior year. But I think I can tell you like the basic structure was like Mondays pick me up, and then you go to your first two classes. And then you go to advisory for a huge chunk of time, lunch, advisory again, and then you go to your final class, and then advisory for the last 30 minutes and you're gone. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're at your internships for 6 hours. So that's all you work on. And then Wednesday and Thursdays are pretty much reproductions of Monday, but kick me out is the last 30 minutes on a Friday.
So do you still take like traditional like Algebra 1 course and English?
Yeah, so the Met, at least the Met Sacramento, I'm gonna probably defer to Eva on the other things, but we followed A through G standards. So yeah, we had traditional offerings for like classes, but because of our size, we didn't have anything like extraordinary. Like some schools have robotics class, we didn't really have that. But what we did have was this thing called Panther Pipeline, which was a way for us to take community college classes for really anything that we wanted to take. So that's how I took the more advanced math class earlier. And it's how I took psychology of death and dying. It's how I took I almost said astrology, an astronomy class. And it's how I took, it's how I got rid of my Spanish requirement and some of my other math requirements was because I got to take them at Sac City.
Neat. Yeah, that sounds like there's loads of opportunities there for like a personalized learning plan and being able to really focus in on your own interests and what you're doing there. You mentioned some of your you did some projects, I guess, was it in conjunction with your internships, or what were some of the projects that you did, or maybe was there one that was really of interest to you that you were proud of?
Yeah, sure. So some projects are your personal projects that you use to fulfill your learning goals, and your independent learning plan. But most of your projects come through something that you develop at your internship. So after being at your internship for a month or so, or however long, you start to get a feel of like what you can do to help that community and what you can do to assist at your job. And that's where a lot of projects come from. So one of my projects when I worked for Soul Collective and Arts, Culture, and Activism Community Center was a built art exhibit for the Crockard's Teen Takeover, which is an art museum in our town. That when they did a teen takeover, I did a art installation there that involved other young people coming and adding their own art to it. So I had developed that installation as my project. And then for a very different flavor, when I worked at the city of Sacramento, one of my projects was supporting the task force for a new minimum wage. So very different vibe, but two different projects.
Very cool.
Yeah, those are such interesting projects and super cool kind of stuff that you got a chance to work on. I kind of want to zoom out just for a second. We've heard a lot about Zelia's experience, and we've heard a lot about what it can be like to be a student at a big picture school. We're still talking about networks of schools and networks in general in our current series. And so maybe, Eva, I would love to hear from you about what is happening sort of on the national level at Big Picture. So how many big picture schools are kind of in the works in the country right now? And what are kind of some of the things that the national network is focusing on right now?
Absolutely. There are over 70 schools nationally, and you've got to remember that we've been around for 25 years. So, an interesting development has also been that for a long time we've had international partnerships. So, there are folks who have seen what we're doing and that have taken it to their countries, and it's actually grown to be bigger than in the US, which is the case in Australia. So, Big Picture Australia has, I think, more schools than we do. And internationally, I think it's about like over 100 big picture inspired schools that we've got. There's folks and actually through school closures and COVID response, that was one of the interesting things that happened was that some of our partners in Italy, who were a couple weeks ahead of us in terms of infection rates and spread, they had students who were very active and who were trying to codify and document some of their lessons learned. So they actually made a website that had all these resources and sort of like learnings that they had, and they were so generous in sharing with our network here in the US to say, hey, we're a couple weeks ahead, here's the stuff we've learned, here's what we're doing. And so this was students creating that website for us to learn, for us and other countries to learn from. And so maybe that might be the best way to sort of explain the reach of the network. Yeah, and how we think about the national strategy is around schools innovation and influence. That's been sort of an organizer for us for many years. Just schools, you hear these proof points where we're really trying to show people how different it can be and really push the edge of understanding, so that personalization doesn't mean that you get to organize the order of the same playlist as other students. That we're talking about, what you heard Zelia talk about is way different than just changing the timing on the same subjects in the same playlist that in front of a computer that a young person might have. So we're pushing the envelope by showing people what that is like in our schools, which is why going to our schools and experiencing them, meeting our students is so important to us. Then innovations, well, you can't do this different type of schooling without having to innovate and just make new stuff. One of the things that we've done is Emblaze is a platform that we use to support schools in managing the internships. So, great. All these young people get their own internships all over the community. Well, years ago, it used to be binders that advisors had with all these contact information and all these sign-ins and sign-outs. And so I'm sure there's the concept of binders. I don't know how long you guys have been teaching, but, having these binders is kind of a teacher thing. But moving from that to an app where young people can check in at their internship and mentors can communicate with the advisors, and that's something we haven't talked about too much, but just the deep relationship and collusion, I would say, between the adults that are advocating and caring for this young person. And so having an app that has them be connected has been really helpful. But just like that, there are many innovations. We've been working a lot around fellowships for young people that are want to get into the trades. So if they're exceptionally gifted and they want to get into the trades, and those are going to be great careers for them, well, getting fellowships for them to be getting into those pathways has been another one of our innovations. So over the years, lots of innovations. It kind of serves as a bit of incubation. Some of our innovations sort of become their own nonprofit sometimes. Sometimes they go and they live out in the world on their own. Sometimes they stay with us. So that's the school's innovation and influence, is that we're kind of all over the place. And sometimes we talk about policy with a capital P and a little p, of anything from the school policy, such that the time and the structures will allow for this type of education. And sometimes we talk about big policy, like trying to make sure that we can give credit to young people for these incredible learning experiences, and that it doesn't rely on, having to write a 10-page paper about their internship, and that it's more of a performance, or that other ways of showing competency matter. So that's kind of policies that we get involved in as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think it's time to do a little reflecting here. Co-hosts, guests, I would love to hear some of the things that are kind of going through your brain, what this conversation has made you rethink about education. Does anybody want to volunteer to go first?
So I'm thinking that there really is no one size fits all school. I think the stories that we've heard here, and just how important the relationships are, and how really sometimes that really big public school down the street is just too big. It's too big. It can't build those relationships. There's not enough time. There's not enough energy. It's just not there. It's just not the right conditions for those relationships to really be able to blossom. So I think that, again, just thinking about that, bigger is not always better. That sometimes these these smaller schools that can personalize instruction and really meet the needs of their students, it's better. It's just better.
Matt, what are you thinking, man?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. One thing that's resonating deeply with me is the idea of students driving the learning, right? That seems like that should be an obvious idea with education, that students should be driving their learning, but so often it's not the case. And as I'm looking at different educational models and thinking about it, and thinking what motivates students and what we're not utilizing, we are not utilizing student agency within our learning. And how often are teachers and school systems and school boards and leaders going to the students and having them ask them to get the internship, ask them what do they want to learn, and allow them to run with it. Because like these examples we've heard, a lot of times if the students invested, they're going to do more, right? Zelia was doing more than what she would have done by doing a simple multiple choice, assignment that doesn't really mean anything. But to get her invested in something and driving the learning and leveraging that agency, we're able to do much more than any administrator could really think up.
Yeah, I love what you're suggesting, Matt. And there's lots of things that are coming up for me in this conversation too. I think one of them is really focused around the importance of the local community to the school. Celia talked quite a bit about the her efforts to kind of push into the local community and get engaged with organizations in the local community. And there's such a disconnect often between schools and their local organizations, and there doesn't have to be. Young people present a wealth of ideas and energy and possibility that if local community members were just to open their doors even a little bit to allow an intern twice a week or something like that, uh, into what their inner workings are, then the benefits not only for, let's say, Zelia, but for everybody later on, because Zelia is going to go do really cool things because she's had these opportunities to really decide what she wants and decide the way that she wants to learn things and make those decisions, those agency driving moments, as you're talking about, Matt. The other thing I'm sort of thinking here is that, man, school is so much more than, and Eva mentioned this earlier, it's so much more than just learning with your mind. And there's so much richness in building and contributing and doing. And so much of our current school models are built around this idea that sitting in a classroom and working with your mind and not your hands and not your heart is the way to go. And I'm just reminded in this conversation that there's much more to learning than that. Zelia, Eva, do either of you want to share a reflection with us?
Well, first, thank you for listening that closely. I mean, if that's what you got out of the conversation, I'm very pleased and proud. Only thing I'll add that we didn't talk about explicitly is about, you heard Zelia say she was special and not exceptional. And I think it's super important to say that is the case for all of our students, and core to beliefs is we work in communities where other people don't believe that they are exceptional, that are special young people, where we work with folks that the teenagers that people are afraid of, sad to say. And so, you hear this story of Zelia. She very much could have been a troublemaker or been labeled in a different way and been thought of as rebellious as a bad thing, as opposed to as a community leader, which is really what she is. And so that is core. And so we're talking about all the young people protesting in the streets. We're talking about all that power that is latent and that is there, and utilizing that for good. I always talk about young people. It's like, use your powers for good. Those powers are there and they will use them. And it's just our responsibility as adults and mentors to make sure that they have avenues for them to use them for the greater good of the community, and that we don't teach them to be afraid of us or to be to be mistreated, frankly. And so that goes for young people of color, that goes for young people who live in poverty, all groups that are often kept furthest from opportunity. Like, we're talking about that. We're not talking about, cherry picking and sort of limiting who we think has potential.
Eva said it so well. And I will also say my experience is being able to come and speak to folks like you on podcasts like this and other opportunities have really proven to me that, like, people don't believe the big picture model works until they see it sometimes, or until they hear from folks. And so I had listened to an earlier podcast y'all had done with Tom Vander Ark, and his number one suggestion was go and visit other schools. And I would say go and visit other schools, go and visit big picture schools, because you won't believe what's possible until you see it. And I think that goes for a lot of people in education. And even though COVID is our reality, I think it opens up the possibility to see things without barriers because of being online. So there's an opportunity there.
I love it. Let's transition into our final sad but final segment of this podcast episode called Plugs. I hope you all brought something that you would like to share with our awesome listeners. Janine, what do you want to plug?
All right, I'm going to go with edelements.com, or Education Elements is what the organization is called. I really like this organization because, well, they put out a lot of great resources, a lot of free resources for educators, white papers, tutorials, webinars. If you sign up on their website, you can get all this free, awesome information. One thing that I like in particular, and I think this is a good point for what we've covered today, is they have a focus on personalized learning and competency-based education. And they have a great white paper that they had put out a while ago on personalized learning that they called the Core 4. I suggest checking it out if you have any interest in doing some personalized learning at your school.
Cool. Sounds awesome. Matt, what do you want to plug?
Yeah, I'm just finished reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. I've been a bit on a reading binge these days, and this book is perfect if you want to get a handle of your Netflix binge. He will help you find another way.
Nice. Okay. Eva, do you want to plug something?
So we've got, like most folks, we had a summer conference that we couldn't have together. So we have turned it to be open actually to anybody. It's free registration. It's called Summerfest. It's on Big Picture's website. And so we're putting out content for young people, for educators, for really community members, anybody online. And so that will go through next week. So depending on when this airs, that might be there. If not, the recordings will be there. A couple other initiatives that we have at the organization that you might want to check out is in response to the protest and a lot of the conversations about race going on. One of our co-founders in collaboration with other folks started this thing called Books with Brothers, which is where you've got men, educators of color that are reading children's books on video. And so providing that gift to the community so that people have, especially young people, have an experience to watch that. And another thing, if you want to hear sort of more stories like Zelia's is and stories from all parts of our network, is we had a blog series that we started right when school closed. And so there was a daily blog series, and we even did some valedictorian speeches that obviously couldn't happen live. And so there's some videos of some of our young people giving valedictorian speeches.
So cool. All right, Zelia, what do you want to plug?
Yeah, I will double down on Eva's. The Big Picture blogs are wonderful. I love them. And then I have a shameless plug for my own nonprofit that I'm working on called Rebel Ventures Network, which takes shamelessly from Big Picture learning for personal and professional development for young people through structured project incubation and peer support networks. It's really at the beginning now, but getting that started. So I'm looking for feedback from anyone that wants to give it. And that's on Instagram. And then also a book that I've been reading that was just wonderful was The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love by Sonia Renee Taylor. Couldn't recommend it more. Awesome read.
Awesome. Well, Eva and Zelia, it's been a true pleasure having you on our podcast. We appreciate the time that you've taken to speak with us and to really give us a deep snapshot of what Big Picture is all about. For all of you listening to our podcast, we hope that you took away from this conversation as much as we have. And again, if you can share this with your colleagues, tweet it out in your network, and head on over to Apple Podcasts, because the more times you rate our show, the better off we're going to be. Thanks for listening.